Today we've got a great malicious compliance story all about the white interior of an 80s Camaro. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, middle manager wants to replace his coworkers with AI? I'll let him throw the first stone. I own a managed service provider, MSP firm, which provides cloud computing services to clients. Business is good enough to pay my employees a respectable wage while offering them a good work-life balance. I haven't had to lay off a single employee yet. I hired a senior IT technician as a middle manager. Let's call him Harry. Harry seems to have gone off the rails about AI. He has started micromanaging our coworkers to an unacceptable extent, and he's kept on pestering me to investigate how I could use ChatGPT and other AI technologies to reduce employee costs. Frankly, this rubbed me the wrong way. Harry doesn't have a stake in any of his coworkers losing their jobs, and his constant micromanaging had become an issue. More so, I looked at ChatGPT and there's simply no way it could replace any of my technical employees. ChatGPT has no agency, nor can it deal with clients, nor can it see the computer screen to troubleshoot jack. However, ChatGPT could easily replace a middle manager, assuming someone else takes on some additional responsibility daily. You see, ChatGPT has a code interpreter mode, which can do calculations and process spreadsheets that can decimate the workload of a middle manager, at least in our firm, allowing their responsibilities to be absorbed by another senior employee, me in this case. I kept this in mind and have been shadowing Harry's job for the past few months. A good employee retired last week. I approached Harry and told him that I took his suggestions to heart and have decided to automate his role with AI. I told him he could accept his redundancy package or be trained in Azure. He chose to be retrained in Azure. Unfortunately for Harry, he'll lose the comfy privileges being a middle manager entails. Fortunately for our coworkers, they'll have an impartial AI making decisions. Fortunately for me, I won't have to pay for a redundant role. As far as ChatGPT goes, I hope the code interpreter mode works a lot better than the default regular 3.5. The handful of times I've had anything related to math that I've handed over to ChatGPT, it's surprising how wrong it ended up getting it. That's when I kind of remembered the main gist of ChatGPT is just regurgitating information it's scraped from the internet. Mountain Butterfly 38 wrote, "Funny how his own suggestion came back and hurt him. I'm sure his employees appreciate it. Great malicious compliance." Laringar replied, adding, "Honestly, it didn't even really hurt him. He got moved back into a technical role after finding his level of incompetence. So he still has a job, doing something he's honestly likely better at than being a manager, and the company gets to reduce their headcount by 1 without actually firing anyone. It's win-win all around." Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy awesome stories of malicious compliance, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our next story is, I Won't Let You Cook Me Alive. I have a second to senior position in my department at work, so theoretically I have my choice of station to go to when I come in, as long as my senior doesn't want it. My senior coworker has a station she always goes to, and it's understood that she likes the 3rd station, and I like the 7th station. Our stations are even denoted by personal items and magnets. My station is preferred because I have medical issues with overheating, and the floor fan points at that location. My personal items at that station include a backup fan in case the big one just isn't enough. Now, this fan is way quieter than the big fan. The new manager complains about the noise of the big one. I have poor hearing, and it doesn't bug me. Recently, the new manager has started stealing my station because the fan in it is quieter when everyone knows there's a preference. Whatever, it's the least awful thing she's done, so it doesn't matter to me as long as I'm not there to need the station. Where she crosses the line is stealing my station right at the start of my shift. I ask her if I could have my station since there's plenty of open stations. She says, "No, you need to be able to work at any station." Knowing that I have an agreement with the office that I can always have the floor fan on if I need it, I start to get some ideas and question, so I can have my personal fan for my things first, right? She quickly gives me that awful manager who thinks they're God face and says, "No, go to your station now and start typing or I'll write you up for not starting on time." I comply like the peaceful worker drone I am and click on the big fan while going to the station right next to her. At this point I'm already sweating, but I'm close enough to the fan that I won't pass out. Just then she clicks the fan off. I sluggishly click it back on. It goes off and on for a whole hour, but at this point, I'm seeing spots, so I give her a heads up. The office says the fan stays on if I need it on. She goes to click it right back on, saying, "I don't care, this thing is too loud." I'm almost office staff anyways, and things will change around here soon. Within the next 2 hours, I'm unresponsive due to heat sickness. At this point, I've magically been placed in a medical unit for a few hours. I don't know how I got here or who called, but my girlfriend brought my things from work. But all she got out of the managers was that I'm dismissed for a few days. All I know right now is that the new manager has a paradigm report to worry about, and hopefully I get my spot from now on. Edit: I fixed the spacing, and as for the fan, I stopped taking it home, because the lobby staff kept making me give the receipt for it and not buzzing me out until I proved it was mine. Part of an old manager's rules because a coworker kept trying to take a keyboard home, but I'm just going to suck it up from now on, so I know I'll have my fan. This definitely worked out well for OP, proved their point, they're never going to be questioned, I'm sure, going forward. But I kind of wish that OP didn't have to end up in any kind of medical facility just to be able to prove this point. It's sad that it even had to get there. Yudoshi wrote, "Mate, your manager just incompetenced and harassed you into a heat stroke. Get a lawyer, demand your ADA accommodations, assuming America. Enjoy your payday. Start with a demand letter when you get back. Since this is their fault, they also owe you for your time out. This is paid leave at their expense." Our next story is, my manager promised his manager that we could get our work done 2 weeks before the agreed timeline, so I made him work on Saturday with me. Almost 10 years ago, I worked at a company where my department analyzed survey and secondary data, compiling it into handbooks each quarter. After 6 months of joining the department, my manager, who joined us 2 months after me, reorganized our tasks in an attempt to improve our efficiency. The manager was promoted internally and was notorious for kissing up to management. He was technically not qualified for the promotion due to a different background required for our department, but one of the C-suite members liked him a lot. He did have some expertise in other areas, but generally had an unpleasant personality. So many people in the company didn't like him much. Along with 3 new projects, I was assigned the handbook task for the first time. The meeting was in February, so my first handbook would be for that year's quarter 1. In the meeting, I also asked my colleague who had managed the project for 4 years to explain the usual timeline. She said it took 6 months, a time frame agreed upon by management for years, considering the person handling it would also have other important projects. This means for quarter 1 data, the printed copies of the handbook need to be ready by the 30th of September. The 6-month period includes collecting the analysis from survey managers, and for secondary data, I would have to contact the data owner and do the analysis myself. I also have to work closely with the outsourced company that does the design and printing. I carried out the handbook project smoothly along with my other tasks, and by late July, the only thing left for me to do was to proofread the content. The next procedure required me, my manager, and the designer to review and finalize every page before sending it to the unit head for approval. Printing and delivery take about 2 to 3 weeks, so we aim to submit the design by mid-August and confirm the final version for printing by the last week of August. However, on the last Friday of July, a whole 2 weeks before our target timeline to send the design to the unit head, this conversation happened. The manager said, "OP, I need you to finalize everything today, because we're sending the design to the unit head on Monday." I said, "Next Monday? Why? We have 2 weeks." They say, "Well, the unit head wants to see some changes around here, so I thought we could speed up the publication of this handbook to start." I told the unit head we would send the design to her on Monday. I say, "Okay, you could have discussed this with me first. I mean, the proofreading is almost done. I can get it done by today, but we still need to sit down with the designer to finalize and sign off. The appointment is in a week." Manager asks me, "Can you do it tomorrow?" Go ask the designer. Now, it was not normal in our company to come to the office and work on the weekend. And of course, I already had a plan for that weekend, so this was really annoying to me. At least I knew that the designer would have no issue moving it to the next day because he is very cooperative. I said I can try, but tomorrow is Saturday. I'm not sure if he can make it. And are you sure we want to rush this? Because even if we meet the designer tomorrow, the hard copy will be delivered just 2 weeks earlier than the normal deadline. Is it that significant? The manager says, "Yes, just go ask the designer now." So I called the designer, and as expected, he had no problem meeting on Saturday. I say, "Mr. Manager, the designer is okay to meet tomorrow. Is 10 a.m. okay with you?" The manager responds, "Huh?" with a puzzled look. I replied, "You also need to be there for the sign-off." Manager said, "I do?" I said, "Yes, you literally need to sign off on the final version to send to the unit head. It's the normal procedure." To be honest, he didn't need to be there aside from following procedure. He'd already seen the design a few times and likely wouldn't have contributed much to the meeting. I would have loved for him not to be there anyway, but at that point, I was quite excited to make him come to the office on the weekend when he obviously didn't realize he also had to be there with the designer. The manager says, "I can't tomorrow. I'm going somewhere until Sunday." I replied, "Well, if you want to send this to the unit head on Monday, then you have to be there tomorrow." The manager sighed and said, "Let me get back to you." About half an hour later, he came up to me with the sourest face ever. 10 a.m. tomorrow is fine, and walked away. I'm guessing he must have ticked off someone when he had to change or cancel his weekend plan, so the next day he came in 1 hour late, not smiling at all, and was rude to the designer and me. He was really unhappy to be in the office on that day, but we got it done by 1 p.m. The following week, the story of how I made my manager come to work on Saturday was told around the company. Apparently, the plan that he had for the weekend was a group trip with some of his buddies who also worked in the company, and he had to make new arrangements to get to the place by himself and arrived late. A lot of people thought it was really funny, including the unit head and some of his buddies, and laughed at the image of him walking into the office on Saturday for some trivial yet necessary work. Nevertheless, the next 2 years that I worked on the handbook, he never promised anyone to have the handbook ready before the 6-month timeline. There's nothing more frustrating than a manager who is more than happy to volunteer their workers' time without ever wanting to put in that level of effort themselves. "Well, I volunteered you to finish it faster than you normally would. Like, gee, thanks for leaving it up to me to shoulder the load." Technos wrote, "I've helped pull this one myself. We had a project due June 1st, just some internal would-it-be nice that had been backburnered thanks to a medical issue with one of the stakeholders in another department. It wasn't a big deal, but the big boss thought it was going to make him look bad, so he put it back on the active list. We groaned and pointed out that without the stakeholder, we were pretty much dead in the water, but he insisted, fine. Every time we would have involved the other guy, we substituted our boss instead. He outranked the other fellow and could do approvals on his behalf after all. We scheduled meetings when he'd normally be sneaking out to play golf or 5 minutes after lunch ended, so he had to come back on time, and while it annoyed him, he didn't give up. So one of the other guys stepped up our little game and scheduled an 8 a.m. meeting on Saturday to catch up on lost time. Sure, we were all ticked at him, but we weren't even a tenth as ticked as the boss would be, so we didn't complain. Boss had to cancel a weekend in Vegas to attend and grumbled the entire morning. Come Monday, when he opened his calendar and saw a second Saturday meeting scheduled, he put the project back on inactive. He was now confident we were now in a good place to pause. Didn't stop us freaking with him though. All meetings were now 5 minutes after lunch, or at 3:30 on a Wednesday, if they involved him. OP responded to that and said, "Love how he was sneaking out to play an entire round of golf while normal working class would sneak out just for a cigarette or run to buy groceries or something. Or did I overestimate the time it took to finish a round of golf?" Our next story is Talk to the Boss. About 14 years ago, I was working IT for a large medical center, one of several owned by the same people. The regional CIO personally put me in charge of setting up and issuing laptops to doctors and other medical staff to go to patients' homes when they could no longer come to the hospital for any number of reasons, including disability, lack of adequate transportation, etc. When we got a new shop supervisor, who was only promoted to that position exactly 1 year to the day after being hired from the outside, something that left myself and a lot of other IT techs very upset, he made it abundantly clear that he was going to make several people's lives miserable, including me. He would look at my Outlook calendar, we all had to share access to our calendar with him, to see when I had someone scheduled to pick a laptop up, do their 3-month software update, etc. Then a few minutes before the person was supposed to arrive, he would order me to do some menial project halfway across the hospital that he could have easily have just done himself, or delegated to one of the new people. If I tried to tell him that I had an appointment, he threatened to write me up for insubordination. Cue malicious compliance. One day, the regional CIO was due for his 3-month update. Right on cue, the shop supervisor tasked me with unboxing, then installing monitors on the first floor. About 15 minutes later, when the regional CIO arrived, he called to ask that I return to the office. I headed back up right away. The shop supervisor didn't know and never met the regional CIO. so the shop supervisor had no clue who he was dealing with. When I arrived, the CIO asked the shop supervisor to leave the room. He asked me what was going on since I was always punctual and thorough to a fault. I told him about the shop supervisor making several of the lives of anyone he disliked miserable with reassigning trouble tickets and multiple random floors at the last second, just as they had projects scheduled, or in my case, as I had appointments close to arriving for the laptops. The CIO even asked why the shop supervisor always seemed to be out of the office most times the director came up, and could never get him on the phone. I just told the truth. He's been much too busy chasing skirts and shooting the breeze with his friends, sir. When the CIO asked if the shop supervisor had a girlfriend on the side, my response was, "Which one? He has us too busy running around to count them." He told me to wait outside the office for a few minutes and brought the shop supervisor back in to have a come to Jesus moment with him. The shop supervisor was put on 90 days unpaid suspension and was written up for gross insubordination for talking back to him, among other things. The CIO even asked HR to start an investigation to see what other department regulations he violated. I almost feel like this was kind of an inevitability, like there was going to be somebody that's going to speak up about how awful this guy is. Either that or the whole thing will fall apart once people are done putting up with his BS for long enough. The Sanch 1128 wrote, "Years ago, my last, thank goodness, corporate jerk boss, referred to here often as Boss from Heck, was notorious for sending people to the branch office of our regional office 2 hours away and calling all hands on deck managerial meetings at 9 a.m. Whichever you picked, you were wrong and subject to write-up, especially if you said anything. Complaints to corporate were of course considered insubordination. And no, there was never any punishment for him. He was a corporate golden child and mega bully sent to our region to punish us for overachieving. And he ran off 6 of his 7 direct reports within 8 months, the 7th being his secretary/mistress. OP responded saying, "Had a similar boss. The hospital director called me and the networking manager to meet with her and the head of the hospice unit. The unit had just opened and admitted their first patient, World War II vet with end-stage cancer. The patient was quite tech-savvy from his time in the military and wanted to have an internet connection to put his affairs in order. The hospice chief even got approval to have one of the local VFW posts to cover the cost of a separate internet connection all to himself. The networking manager and I agreed to it and got it done later that afternoon. We even went so far as air-gapping his connection so that he couldn't access the hospital network and no one could get into his personal computer. When the CIO found out about this, he personally went to the patient's room and disconnected the Ethernet cable from the wall. He also ordered the network manager and I to several hours of remedial training. Needless to say, the hospital director was freaking livid. She dragged him into her office and screamed at him so loudly, everyone in that director's office could clearly hear the conversation behind the closed door. She also ordered him to personally apologize to the dying veteran, as well as me and the networking manager for punishing us simply for doing our jobs and helping the dying veteran. Our next story is, make it so a person with zero knowledge could understand it? Okay. My previous workplace was an NGO, hired me to do what was deemed an impossible task, reaching to and gaining the support of several groups that are notoriously difficult to recruit. It was a pretty critical point, with over $1.2 million of funding depending on it. Not to brag, but this is something I'm actually expert in, one of very few in my country. I got to work and used some pretty unorthodox methods. Initially, management seemed to be fine with it since it proved extremely effective. Within 8 months, the organization moved from being irrelevant at best to having a small army of volunteers, active groups, and vocal ambassadors, and gained a reputation for being the most radical and interesting player on the scene. The thing is, the success was because I was there to cover for the organization's irrelevance. As long as they don't implement some deeper changes, this is as good as it will get. Except nobody seemed very interested in implementing any deeper changes. In fact, they began doing increasingly more problematic stuff. Think public racist comments by staff members, making it harder and harder to maintain the support. I kept raising the alarm that this will not end well, and at some point, this and my less than standard methods annoyed management enough that they decided to fire me. I pointed out to the manager that if they don't want to lose all of the work, they'll at least have to recruit someone with similar experience, which is going to be very difficult to do. Again, very few experts on this. In response, my manager demanded that I write down a document for my future replacement, and specifically, that I make it so a person with absolutely zero previous knowledge could understand it. Zero knowledge, you say? Alright, I sat down and wrote an extensive document, which included nothing but the most obvious, basic, and offensively unhelpful information. No, you cannot call people slur. No, not even when they aren't present. Phrased as if it were written for a third grader. If they hire someone competent, they won't need that document anyway. If they hire someone clueless, well, they'll probably be able to understand it. I ended my employment there in September, but stayed in touch with some of my former crew. By the end of November, half the volunteers I recruited dropped out. The 200 plus people involved in one of the flagship projects just stopped showing up. The assistance network stopped responding altogether. An attempt was made to continue one of the other long-running projects, but since they didn't know how or why it worked, it flopped gloriously and stopped running after one more session. The annual fundraiser I started failed to have any relevance when they attempted to copy it this December, and only 7 people showed up. 3 of the groups decided to exit and operate under a different host, after also going public about the management being both out of touch and abusive. Oh, as of today, it seems like they lost the $1.2 million funding too. You gotta love when you, somebody who clearly knows what they're doing, comes and points something out, and you get reprimanded for it as if it's not like honestly part of your job to do so. It actually is wild to me that OP pointed something out and their response was, okay, start writing up the training documents for your future replacement. Oh, I'm sure just about anybody in that position is going to do that well. I'm definitely going to make this the most awful piece of handbook guidance you can possibly use. T. James V. wrote, wow, talk about minglement. You gotta seriously be out of touch to see a successful project, poison it with bad PR, and then fire the expert behind it for raising concerns. Then to have the nerve and ignorance to ask said expert to write a cheat sheet for dummies to handle this huge, complicated, and high-stakes project, as if a new hire with a tutorial can replace the freaking expert. Our next story is, crickets be terrifying. A few years ago, I got a new phone. I let the vendor set all of the notifications since I wasn't, and still am not, really into phones, talking or texting, and it seemed easier to let him do it. At the time, I had a desk job and I would set my alarm to go off to remind me to do some walking during my breaks. Otherwise, I would sit all day and have noodle legs while trying to get home at the end of the day. So the day after I bought my phone, I go to work. Morning break, I remembered without needing the alarm, so I shut it down before it could sound off. Lunch comes and goes. So then it gets to be late afternoon. My office partner and I are in our after-lunch slowdown, not quite sleepy, but less than alert. Then my phone alarm goes off. After office partner and I peeled ourselves off the ceiling, I frantically pawed at the phone for a while before finding the shutoff for the alarm. The vendor had set all of the notifications to Reveille. You know, the army wake-up trumpet song? I apologized to my office partner over and over again. What, Condessa? The freak? And let him watch while I figured out how to change all of the notification settings to something less alarming. I set it to crickets. I thought the sound was annoying enough to get me up and walking, and nobody is afraid of crickets, so I was safe there. Or so I thought. Office partner and I got a kick out of telling that story every chance we got, and it always got a laugh. Until one Friday evening, I was leaving late in the elevator with some other stragglers, and I get one of my rare texts. Granted, it sounded really loud in that tiny elevator, but I was shocked to see mean girl sneers on everyone's faces. One of the ladies says, "That's your ringtone?" Yes. And I tell the story of how it came to be the default and end with, "Because nobody's afraid of crickets." More sneers and a sulky, "Some people are afraid of crickets," from the back. Then the one who spoke up, I guess she was the leader or whatever, begins to tell me how to change the volume and ringtone so as to not upset others. I'm not a phone person, so I would have been fine with that. The problem was that she added condescending to the sneer. That opened it up for the rest of the women to ramp up the sneers and condescending remarks. I basically shut down at that point, because watching a bunch of 30-somethings turn into high school mean girls was freaking me out over a ringtone. Monday morning rolls around and I get called into my supervisor's office. She looked very, very embarrassed. so embarrassed that it took her a few tries to get out what she had to say. Apparently, the mean girls had complained to their boss about my vile ringtone and insisted that she do something about it. She complained to my boss, and my boss had lower seniority. She basically apologized for making me change my ringtone. So I went back to my office and told office partner the whole story. We stared at each other for a few moments before we started laughing. I know what you're going to do, Condessa. Go for it. Then I changed all of the notifications back to the reveille. I don't understand why they had such an issue with the ringtone being crickets like it was some affront to them. I mean, I suppose there might be some rare person out there that's so scared of bugs that hearing just the sound of crickets would be enough to set them off. But surely that's the exception, right? Not the case. The reveille thing takes me back to my high school days though, when I needed an alarm to get me up, and so I set my alarm to the William Tell Overture. It was pretty effective. Pleasant Bad 924 wrote, "My ringtone isn't anything vulgar or illegal, it's the sound of crickets. If you'd like to control ringtones on my phone, then you'll need to provide a phone and a plan that the company pays for. Otherwise, my personal phone is my personal phone and I'll use whatever inoffensive ringtone I choose." OP responded, "Working in a bureaucracy has great job security, but you give up a lot in exchange, such as being able to tell people to freak off when they really need to hear it." Our next story is, you want to put what in the brand new Camaro? Years ago, in the early 80s, fresh out of high school, I worked in the stockroom of a now defunct department store. One day, I get a call to load some driveway sealer in a customer's car. I show up at the operator's window. The customer showed me their receipt. They go to the parking lot to retrieve their vehicle. They pull up in a brand new Chevy Berlinetta Camaro with white interior. He asks me to put the 3 large buckets of driveway sealer behind the front seats on the floor. I told him that's not a good idea. He insisted that's what he wanted, so that's what I did. I lifted one of the buckets to move it over, and there was a black ring on his brand new carpet. He obviously pitched a fit, asking for the manager, etc. I had the operator page my manager. He shows up, assesses the situation, asks me what happened. I explained to him that I tried to talk him out of it. He looks the guy in the eye and tells him that it's his problem. If that were me, I feel like I would just straight up refuse. Your car is too darn expensive, and obviously that interior job is probably too darn expensive for me to go and risk my job just because you keep saying it's okay. In fact, like, if you really want this to happen, let me go contact my manager first. I'm not going to be the one that goes and screws this up and then afterwards addresses it with the manager. Wadsworth McStumpy wrote, "Dude should have just bought a cheap plastic drop cloth from the paint department. I've done that many times and I don't even have a nice car. I'm mildly surprised he didn't have you put them on the seat." Our next story is, Platoon Sergeant said we could only have 2 beers with dinner. Germany was my first duty station when I was in the army. After FTXs, field training exercises, the platoon would get together for a platoon dinner at the local Hofbrau. Since it was always the start of a 4-day, we would all get hammered at the platoon dinner. Well, Platoon Sergeant eventually said we could only have 2 beers with dinner, so we started ordering the 1-liter steins. Then Platoon Sergeant said we could only order 1 stein with dinner, so we started showing up to the Hofbrau early to have beers before dinner, and still ordered the steins and then have 1 with dinner. Usually by the end of the night, all of us were at least 4 steins in and absolutely obliterated, but still only had 1 stein or 2 beers with dinner. Good times, good people. I get what the platoon sergeant was trying to do, but it doesn't surprise me that they very easily found their own ways around it. And I could imagine, considering how stressful being in the army could be, you might do just about anything to have that kind of unwinding day. TRNAOVN53N wrote, "Coming back from Afghanistan, we were in Kyrgyzstan and were given 2 tickets to get beer with that one night. We were allowed 2 beers a person, and that was it. It only took a second to realize why the Coors, Budweiser, and Miller 12-ounce bottles looked like they were all covered in dust, and the 24-ounce Stellas, I think that's what they were, it was 20 years ago, were gone as soon as they brought the next case out. People were selling their tickets for $20 as well. So what a night that was." But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.